listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 104 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Andrew Lockwood. Andrew is the founder of Rugby Vacancies and S&C Vacancies, and most recently, Grey Wolf Consulting Group. He's been a member of the British Army since 2004 and has toured both Iraq and Afghanistan. He's had a wide variety of coaching roles in both union and rugby league, and also created a charity called the Rugby Outreach Project. It's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Andrew.
Hi, mate.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we hooked this up a while ago, and then our comms got a bit mixed up, and but now we're back, so that's great. And you're in Canada.
Yeah, mate. Sunny Kingston. You can kind of see over my shoulders through the blinds, and it's blue skies and sunshine. Although it's about -4, but it's blue skies and sunshine.
That's in Canada we call that mild. So you've got a good day there. How's you're in Kingston, so how's your tragically hip knowledge? This is pretty important stuff right now.
It's awful, mate. I haven't listened to any of them.
Mate.
I'm going to have to get the greatest hits at some point, I think, because people talk about it.
Yeah,
but I haven't listened to any of them so far.
Yeah, your favorites is the album you want to get, and that'll give you a good cross section of their hits.
No
All right, so what's your playing backstory? You in the intro, there's a bit of rugby league in there, lots of rugby union. Where did it all start?
Yeah, a little bit, mate. So like a lot of people, I started playing local rugby club in Devon in the UK. Played from sort of under 7s or 8s, all the way through to school and then university and beyond. I took a gap year between school and university, and I went to Western Australia. Played in WA. In Perth for a team called Leeming Lions. Also managed to get a bit of game time for Western Australia under-19s. That was interesting.
Nice.
Never got to play in front of the Australian selectors. It's probably a good thing though, because that Australian, the sort of junior world under-19s team that year was pretty strong.
Yeah.
And so played all the way through. Joined the army. Still sort of kept on playing. Managed to get one game for Germany Rugby League
right on.
When I was based over in Germany. That was interesting. That was me, quite a few expat Australians, and only 1 or 2 Germans. So it was mainly an Australian team, but ironically we played against an army team. So that was interesting. Played a bit of mainly union, bit of league. Haven't played much for a few years. Funny enough, I've actually picked up playing hurling and Gaelic football out here in Kingston, which is unusual. It's not often you get an English bloke in the British Army playing Gaelic sports. But it's been great fun. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And what about coaching? When were the first experiences in coaching, either in union or league?
So actually, my first experience of coaching was basketball in the late 90s. So I played a lot of sport growing up. Rugby was the main one, but sort of basketball and cricket as well were probably the other two. And in the sort of mid to late 90s, I started coaching kids basketball. I was only in my late teens at the time. And I used to do, in the summer holidays, I would do the council-run sports camps. So I would be taking kids for basketball or football or athletics or whatever it was that day. So that was my first experience of coaching, and it was with kids. And it probably gave me the biggest insight into coaching than any other situation I've been in. Kids. So as a young person, coaching kids, and I think for any coach, if you want to develop as a coach, I think coaching kids has a particular. It's a real learning curve, and it's different to coaching adults, but in a good way. And if you're a good coach with kids, I think you'll make an excellent coach when you're coaching adults. So, would recommend coaching kids to anyone. It was a real baptism of fire. especially as a kind of 16, 17, 18-year-old having to deal with kids running around in the chaos that ensues.
As a school teacher, I empathize.
So that's kind of my first coaching experience, and then I focused mainly really on playing for a few years, and then until I joined the army, and then in which case, I was then involved a lot more on the non-playing side, so a bit of coaching for teams in the military. And recently, I haven't done much coaching recently in terms of on the grass, boots on kind of rugby coaching. I've sort of transitioned a bit more into personal development and looking at leadership and culture. Yeah,
cool. And you mentioned cricket in there, mate. Is now a good time to talk about the Ashes?
So we can talk about as much as you like. I haven't followed cricket for a long time. I was always more interested in playing. Watching, I still find it really dull. Playing was great, unless I got out for a duck, in which case it felt like a bit of a waste of a day. But playing was always much more interesting than watching.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'm the opposite actually. I didn't play a lot of cricket. I had just loads of backyard cricket and a little bit of school cricket, and then kind of fifth grade in my late 20s with the boys. But yeah, I could watch first ball to last ball in a 5-day test. Love it. All right, what about mistakes as coaching? What are some of the big mistakes you've made as a coach, and what kind of ways did you kind of try and right the ship?
So I think that definitely one of the things that I realized pretty quickly when I started coaching sort of representative level teams in the military was that the players wanted to hear what I had to say, which they didn't. They don't need to stand there and be told how to play or what to do. I realized pretty quickly actually they wanted the opportunity to play, and that was quite I knew that, I think, from sort of doing the coaching with the kids as a young guy, but then I'd kind of forgotten it or not really considered it or not really linked the two together. And so, I remember the first couple of sessions doing S&C and skills. Players didn't want to stand there and be told by me what to do. And so that I rapidly kind of changed my sessions to be more game related, more ball time, more ball in play, more activity, more actually doing rugby rather than going through a drill. And when I reflect back on my playing career, that's the stuff that I enjoy. That's my bias. I enjoyed that kind of stuff. What I never really enjoyed was, when we used to do it a lot, was the kind of like classic 2-on-1s or 3-on-2s, where if you put a serious face on and put in a pass, then the coach thinks you're doing all right, but actually the benefit of that is minimal. And I realized that it was decision making and your ability to operate in chaotic situations and the unknown and being able to adapt was actually probably more beneficial than just being able to complete a 2-on-1 in a grid.
Yeah. No, I think that raises a really good point. I think some coaches might fall into that trap of, we do lots of games with the kids, but as soon as we coach the adults, we go pretty drill heavy. We'll go get that technique perfect, all that kind of stuff. But I'm the same with my senior teams. I coach them the same as I'd coach my kids. It's I'm looking for 60, 70, 80% of the time that we're doing is actually games-based activities. Very, very little isolated one-on-one skill drills, especially in season too.
Because it's just and outside of the professional games, so for 99% of it, everyone else
exactly.
Actually they train on 2 evenings a week and play on a Saturday. So if they turn up and they don't enjoy that hour that they're there, they're not going to come back. And actually, the reason for doing rugby or sport in general is because it's fun. One of the metrics I used to use was one of the teams I coached we had quite a high Fijian number of players, about 30 to 50%, depending on who was available at the time. And I used to use hearing people chatting and laughing as a metric of how well the session was going. And if you could hear Fijians laughing and chatting, then I knew that the session was going all right. If it was all quiet, I thought there's something wrong here. We need to change this because it's just not working and no one's engaged. So that was one metric I used to use quite regularly.
Yeah, it's just a joy playing with. I haven't coached any Fijians, but I've played with a bunch of Fijians, and It's just amazing playing with those guys and how much enthusiasm they bring to the game and how creative they are. And yeah, that's a really good observation, that using them as a metric. All right, what you said you're taking a bit of a transition from coaching into more leadership things. What's the big interest there? Why are you moving kind of in that direction in terms of importance levels for a team game?
So I suppose it's kind of links to starting up Rugby Vacancies a few years ago, and so there's a backstory. Is I found myself with zero involvement in rugby in about March 2017, which was really odd because it was the first time in about 30 years I'd had no involvement, no playing, no coaching, nothing, and it was really odd. And so I was looking around for coaching roles, and I would find them, but they'd be in the wrong part of the world, or they wouldn't suit me, or whatever. And so I kind of started putting these all in one place, and hence how Rugby Vacancies was started. And that's grown, and because of my experience in the military with helping soldiers transition from the military to civilian life, I realized there was a niche for players and coaches in terms of sort of career assistance. Whether that was regardless of sort of the where that player or coach is on their career path. Actually, it's always helpful to have a chat about what their goals are, what they want to achieve, maybe what they want to do outside of the sport, that sort of thing. And this happened a couple of times informally. So people would get in touch. Often it would be referral. So someone would refer a player to me and say, hey, this guy's looking at leaving and getting into coaching or finishing up his playing, and I'd have a chat with them, and it kind of snowballed from there. So that's something that I offer now, and really it's the skills that I developed in the military helping soldiers transition transposed to professional sport. And actually soldiers and rugby players are really similar. Often the issues that they face when they transition from one career to the next are really similar. So that was a sort of a pretty straightforward switch, and COVID probably helped that, in that there were, over the last couple of years, there's been quite a few guys who have lost contracts, whether that's players or coaches, or they've been told their contracts aren't being renewed or whatever. So that's had a bit of an upswing in the last couple of years. And then I said the leadership and culture development is, I've been really lucky in the army in that I've had various experiences and jobs related to leadership and then developing culture, positive culture. And I've been kicking this idea around for a couple of years about the sort of common areas of leadership and cultural development. And I'd had a couple of conversations with people where I'd voiced that, and it seemed to have some uptake, and I thought there might be something in this. And so I thought, right, having sort of socialized this with other people, I realized actually, this is something that this is observations from my sort of military and my time in sport that I can relate to professional sports teams. And it comes down to three really key areas. And leadership and culture are probably two sides of the same coin. It's really difficult to have a good culture without good leadership. It's difficult to have good leadership without a good coach to embed it in. And so those three areas that I came to were shared experience amongst players and staff and coaches, understanding of each other, the organisation, where they fit, but definitely understanding of each other in terms of players, coaches, staff, and the organisation. And the third one was empathy. And I sort of reflected back on my experiences and what I'd seen and done, and I realised that where those three elements were present in the teams that I'd been part of, you could deem it that they were performing well or successful, inverted commas. But where there was then mistakes that I'd made was when I'd gone away from those kind of three key principles. And I thought that was I found really interesting. I thought, right, I can relate this then. I can use that experience to then help other people develop their leadership and team culture.
Right. Well, well, I definitely want to talk more about that as we kind of get into your new project. Just backtracking a bit with Rugby Vacancies, is that still operational? And the other question I have is, there's quite a few options for coaches to look at coaching elsewhere, coaching overseas, those kind of things. But your group kind of really took off. Can you explain why that was?
So it's free to view all the jobs. So everything that's posted on the social media, there is always an email or a link to the application page, and it's free to view. So anyone can view any jobs from all around the world. And it's I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think it's the only place that puts rugby and rugby related jobs in the one place for people to look at. And that could be everything from the UK, Australia, US, and it's everything from coaching. There's not many playing roles, but actually, clubs are looking for players. So, they do come up, especially this time of year, but it's everything from playing, coaching, community roles, administration roles. If it's related to rugby, then it's going to be in there. And I sort of purposely did that and kept it broad because I think that if you have a passion for a sport, particularly rugby, and you want to develop that passion into a full-time job or career, then there are options open to you other than playing and coaching. And so you can still be involved in rugby. I was on a chat with a guy the other day who his actual main job was in IT. So he was a developer, a software developer, and he hadn't considered sport as an avenue for a career change. But when you think about it, every club, every professional club or team will have a requirement for IT infrastructure or that kind of thing. I said, these jobs do come up. If you want to work in sport full time and it's not coaching, there are other avenues for you. And there's loads. So, for example, if you have most franchises or professional teams now have at least one or two members of their social media or content team, because it's such a big part of life now. And so if let's say you're a graduate, a marketing graduate, and you want to get into social media and content and stuff like that, you can work full-time in sport. And there's other jobs, loads of other jobs. That's one example. Yeah. And so I think because Rugby Vacancies has a really broad range of roles across the world, so everywhere I can find jobs, it allows people to then see those jobs and connect to those jobs from wherever they are.
All right. Well, back to the leadership content. I'm curious about what differences you might see in your time with the British military and coaching teams in terms of building that culture, and even things like empathy and are there some big differences in those two groups, or is it just a team that's looking for a common goal and they're working towards it?
So I think the differences are actually pretty small. The similarities are huge, and that's whether you're a sports team or you're running a team in the military. And by developing sort of shared experience amongst your team, that allows players to communicate more. That's not necessarily your kind of pre-season weekend team building, although it could be. So there's kind of big macro events, and you see sort of international or professional teams doing that quite a lot. But it's not necessarily the activity. What it does is that shared experience allows players to communicate more and get to know each other. And that's the key aspect of doing that. You could be doing anything. It could be raft building to cross the river, or it could be ballroom dancing. It doesn't matter. The point is that it's an activity and it's a shared experience. And then in terms of understanding, what understanding does is it allows people to understand each other and therefore work more closely, understand strengths and weaknesses. And that's in the military team, that's really key, but it's also key in a sports team as well. So you need to understand each other. You need to understand your role, where you fit in that organization, what's expected of you. And that includes behaviors, job role, but also behaviors as well. And then empathy, and this is being able to show empathy with each other or up and down or side to side, wherever your place is in the team. But being able to show empathy allows a team to generate trust. And trust is one of, if not the key element of any performing team. Without trust, you're just a group of individuals. And so what empathy does is it allows you to show vulnerability in a safe way, and it allows trust to develop. And without that, no team will be successful.
Yeah. And what are some methods that you pull those kind of those ideas out from groups? You mentioned shared experiences, that you could create something, but then the other two areas, how can you go about working with a team to pull out those values?
So one of the things that I've done previously with the team was we all got together, and at various points we discussed things. We would discuss a career highlight, just something we thought we'd done really well.
Yeah.
We discussed who our hero was. So that could be anyone, whether that was a sporting hero or a family member or a parent or something, but someone who had a significant impact in your life.
Yeah.
And then a hardship, and what difficulties that person had faced and how they'd overcome. And that sharing was, so it was a shared experience. It was also allowing players to develop a better understanding of each other, where they came from, how they got to where they were. And it just showed, it allowed players to open up and be vulnerable in a safe space. And there was the odd tear, because sometimes these hardships were really hard. But what it meant was that the team understood each other in a profound way that was a bit more than just, it's a friend who turns up and trains next to me at rugby.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, and this is why I love sport and why I love coaching so much. I think that it can be a conduit there of really, really genuinely helping someone through it. So if they get hyper emotional about their experience, they obviously are in the early stages of acknowledging it and working through it, and somewhat accepting it, and even just telling people can be hard. Whereas others who have already gone through those stages and are able to talk about it freely and openly, they're in a different place, and they might be able to help and assist. So I think there's huge benefits there.
And it was, it's a really interesting way of allowing players to get to know each other, rather than the kind of traditional way, which was, you play a pre-season game, barbecue, and then everyone gets drunk, which I'm sure still has its merit. But I suspect that these days that's
it's a sometimes.
I think we probably moved on.
Yeah, it's like nutrition. It's a sometimes food. It's a little treat. The packet of Tim Tams and the hot milk. You can't do it every day. Cool. That's great. Well, that leads us into your new project, Grey Wolf Consulting Group. Love the name. And you're using a lot of what you're talking about there, but mostly you're both your military and your coaching experience to help sporting teams develop leadership and culture. How'd that come about, that group, and how's it processing so far?
So far it's going quite well. It's still fairly new, but it's, like I said, I've been kicking this idea around for a couple of years, and it was voicing it over the last kind of 4 or 5 months, and voicing this concept of those sort of 3 pillars that made me think, there's something in this. And then after I kind of launched, there's been some really interesting informal conversations with coaches from around the place who are currently coaching or who are looking at leadership and culture development outside of sport, which is not an area I'd consider crossing over to, but it's possible. So far going really well, and there will be, and I think it will develop further. I've just enrolled in a professional doctorate, the outcome of which I'm hoping is going to be some kind of book looking at lessons for sport from the military in terms of leadership and culture development. Be a few years away yet, but that's just started. Yeah.
Cool. So have you started working with any groups or teams with the project yet?
Informally, yes.
Yeah.
And they are, but it's early days yet. So it's interesting that I've been doing this for a while in terms of informally assisting coaches. But now there's kind of a name to it, and there's a process.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it'll take off fairly soon. But there's been some really interesting informal discussions so far about where this is going to go and how it can assist teams.
Cool. And what have you found are the needs?
Mainly that I think a lot of coaches already have an idea of what they probably should do. It then comes down to making those, sort of voicing that. So sort of acknowledging that, here's what I already know, here's what I think I need to do. And then the bit to be able to action that can sometimes be a bit difficult, especially if the existing culture won't support that kind of change, that makes that change a bit more difficult. And so sometimes it's not necessarily about building a culture, it's about changing a culture. And sometimes that can be more difficult, especially if it is a culture that is ingrained and is kind of part of the fabric of the organization. And that could be a positive or negative. But trying to make those changes can sometimes be quite difficult, despite the fact that a coach will know probably what they need to do, but it's how they can then do that and those small action steps, those little steps they can take to make those changes.
Yeah, like this is something that for 10 years of my 15 years of coaching, I've been really interested in, and it takes skill. It takes a lot of skill to do these things that you're talking about with a group, and it's a bit of a tightrope walk as well. You can do some harm as well if you don't follow up, or if something goes in a direction that you weren't prepared for, or you don't have support from the management of whatever group you're in. So yeah, it's a challenging process for sure.
And I think that sport is professional sport is such an unforgiving place. And so it's probably unlikely that a coach is going to come in and make big sweeping changes, but actually the ability to make small incremental changes it is definitely more doable. And then the knock-on effects to that will probably be bigger than the small change being made.
Yeah. And I kind of look at it as kind of like a 3-year kind of thing, that if I'm starting with a new team, I'm expecting to get where I want to be on not a results kind of standpoint, but on a team culture and leadership and harmony within the group area. It's gonna take about 3 years is what I've found.
Yeah, and that's
depending on the group as well. If it's a brand new group or it's a mature group, maybe they don't need a lot. But yeah, just from my experience, it's been a good chunk of time.
And you're right, and it's so contextual that it can be, you can have the same coach going to different teams and the outcome be completely different.
Yeah.
You look at think of an Australian example, Anthony Seibold at the Rabbitohs, won everything, crest of a wave, went to the Broncos. I think he was removed after a season or a season and a half, something like that. Great coach, now coaching England as an assistant, England Rugby as an assistant coach. His coaching ability didn't change, but the context with which he did that change and the location, the situation, and the group, and you had a different outcome. So it's really contextual, and
maybe his ability to adapt might be something to consider as well.
Yeah, and I think that a coach's leadership and their ability to develop a culture, it is really contextual, and it often will depend on the players, the club, or the organization, and the methods you use will probably differ from one situation to another. And if a coach is unable to adapt or change, and they're a bit rigid, then potentially that's where the problems come. But it is contextual, and that's why sometimes people get it absolutely right, and sometimes people get it absolutely wrong. But then there's lessons that you can get from both of those, and often the times you get it wrong are the times where you learn the biggest lesson.
Hi, coaches. Well, ever since announcing my goal to launch the Evolve online coaching course this year, I've had a few questions around the meaning of the name Evolve. Well, firstly, Evolve is an acronym based on the title for each module, and within those modules are chapters dealing with content around session delivery, team culture, how to improve attendance through the environment you create, the science of coaching, coach health, and many more. As well as this, Evolve is also a description of my personal experience and growth as a coach from running this podcast over 6 years. The changes in my coaching philosophy, methodologies, creativity, and weekly training cycle, among other things, have really been immeasurable. The catchphrase of the pod has always been sharing ideas to make the game better. And the game gets better when we as coaches get better. So that's my goal with Evolve. Provide an online course based on 100 plus interviews with some amazing coaches so that people can grow and develop at their own pace in the comfort of their own home. Stay tuned for more updates, but for now, kick back and enjoy this episode. We've talked about a lot about culture, not so much about leadership. What are some strategies you've used in the past to, develop leaders within the group, identify leaders within the group, and support them in that leadership journey?
So we're quite lucky in the military in that the leadership development is very intentional. So almost every time you change rank and you're promoted, there is an element of training, or prior to that, there's an element of training to prepare you for that promotion, or that step up, or that change. So the military is really good about doing that, very intentional, from the absolute lowest ranks all the way through, very intentional about developing its leaders.
I had a buddy on from the Canadian Army, and he talked about you got to be able to do 2 jobs up at any time, and that because you never know.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And what I've noticed is, so I had one job where I was working at the assessment and selection centre that assessed people who wanted to join the army as future leaders. So before going to Sandhurst as an officer cadet in the British Army, you would come to this small town in the Wiltshire countryside to go through your assessment and selection, and I was one of the people that did that. But we also worked with civilian organisations about how to identify leadership in their sort of management structure, and we would sort of discuss how the army did it, and they would talk about how they did it, and then we sort of discuss. And what I noticed was that often the empathy wasn't really considered sometimes in civilian organizations. That's changed now, I think, but it used to be a case perhaps that you were promoted on your potential ability rather than character. Now that sounds a bit strange. Well, someone's performing well, then they should be promoted. But actually, someone's character and how they deal with others is often a better determining factor of whether or not they'll be a good leader, or they'll be able to step up into a leadership role. And that's kind of backed up by the fact that when the army assesses and selects people to go to Sandhurst as junior leaders, actually what they're doing is they're assessing their character. So they're looking for leadership potential, and they're assessing their character. No one turns up and is going to be a general on day one. Everyone has to start somewhere and go on a bit of a leadership journey. And so really what you're looking at is someone's character and their potential for leadership, rather than the finished product. Of course, that means that you've then got to back that up by developing them as individuals and leaders. But if an organization is serious about developing its culture and its leadership, then they absolutely need to look at developing its leaders and developing those people that it's promoting. Because it's easy to bring someone in from outside and go, ta-da, we've just hired someone to go and do X, Y, and Z. But actually, that doesn't develop the culture within the organization. And those people that you've already got, that you've already invested in, they're the ones who perhaps you might want to develop.
And from a rugby standpoint, grassroots team, maybe 2 coaches, and like you said, you're meeting twice a week. How would you see coaches' roles in supporting those leaders, or selecting them and supporting them through the season.
And it's that's a really interesting point when teams select their captain, their on-field captain.
Mm-hmm.
And I would absolutely advise they select on character. They might not necessarily be the standout player in the team. They might not be the top try scorer or the top point scorer, but I would definitely select a captain on character. And what you could also select, which I see happening more often, is an on-field and an off-field captain. So you're kind of what people would traditionally call the club captain, and then the team captain, because you can split those responsibilities. And those two people might be different. Those roles and responsibilities slightly different, but definitely select on character over ability.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I was actually going to bring that up. That often you'll see, those captains of teams are not the star. They're not the standout player, but they can't be droppable either. You don't want to be in a position where, sorry, buddy, I have to bump you down to seconds, and you're the team captain. You've got to make sure that's
it is, and it's
they can perform.
It's a really interesting dynamic. And I remember when Dylan Hartley was selected as the England captain, the press went to town. And actually, he turned out to be a very good captain.
100%.
But at the time, the press, the British sort of rugby press, were up in arms about Dylan Hartley being the captain. But history tells us actually he was. And if you listen to players who discuss his captaincy, actually he was pretty good, because from an external perspective, there was one view, but from the internal perspective, it was deemed that actually he had the right character in order to be the captain, and that I think is that's a key aspect to any leadership or captaincy role, especially within sport, that it needs to be done on character. And that doesn't mean you can't have a number of and I know that some teams do co-captains. So Bath used to do, I'm not sure if they still do, but a couple of seasons ago, Bath would have two captains on the pitch listed as co-captains. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic and a really interesting way of doing it. And you can absolutely set up some sort of leadership group to assist the captain in terms of and I think that leadership group, and if you're going to go down that route, I think that leadership group needs to be a really broad spectrum. So it needs to be a young, new, inexperienced player, as well as the old horse who's been around for years, because you need those diverse opinions, you need those different biases, you need those different ways of doing things or viewing life in order to be able to make the best decision for the team.
One of my my team culture heroes is Ray McLean, and his book Any Given Team, and I had him on very early on in the podcast, and he's been the one who coined that term leadership group, apparently, and he developed his model through the Australian Air Force. Actually, he's a phys ed teacher, but developed his model through there. And his big thing is that leadership group is making sure that players have a say in who's in that group, and that there's some kind of democratic process that elects that group. And often what happens anyhow is that the group you'd elect as a coach, after observing your team, marries up pretty well with what the leadership group is doing. What experience have you had with that, with creating leadership groups in that way?
So exactly that. We had to be very intentional about who was in that group. I can think one example of one team within one representative team in the Army. We purposefully made it diverse. So we had we had the team captain, who we thought would be a good option for the team captain, and also a number of other players. We said, look, we want to draw you in because we want you to represent the voice of the players. And we put this we did exactly as you suggested. We put it to the group, and actually we did a little exercise as a coaching group. We wrote down who we thought the team would select and pick. And funnily enough, it was actually pretty similar because those kinds of people, once you've been in a team for a period of time, you can probably work out who would be a good fit for those kind of roles. And actually what that did is that we took it one step further, and we said, okay, here's our games, here's, maybe what we want to achieve. As a playing group, how do you want to do it? And that gave, as a coaching group, that was quite a vulnerable moment, because it was saying, look, we want you to tell us how you want to play, how you want to do it. We can stand here and tell you how we think you want to do it, but that's not going to achieve any kind of buy-in. That's not going to get the team energized. It's not going to allow those organic team behaviors to develop, which we wanted. And actually the team, when they discussed it, said, look, here's what we think, here's how we think we want to play. And it was interesting in that actually, as a coaching group, what we thought they might say and actually what they said was pretty similar. So that was quite lucky. There's been, I imagine there's teams or coaching groups who've done that. And actually, maybe the players came back with something different, maybe a slightly more diverse answer of how they wanted to play. And that's absolutely fine, because as a coach, I think you're trying to develop the player or the players and the team, rather than the team reflecting you as a person, which is probably more about ego rather than about coaching. And there's a vulnerability to coaching, and if you get it right, there's a vulnerability in which a coach can absolutely say, look, how do you want to do it? Pass it to the players, and when that comes back at you, you go, okay, this is how you want to play, this is how you want to do it. Great, we will marry up what you want to do with perhaps what the club or the organization wants to do, and somewhere in the middle there is that sweet spot. And now what that does is it achieves buy-in throughout the whole club, so the players feel invested because they're listened to, and the club and the organization say, well, look, the way that you're going with the players is the way we want to go with the club, and everyone is then doing the same thing, and everyone can get behind that. And that's really key, because when you have that culture that divests between the playing on the field and off the field, that's when frictions can arise, and that can be detrimental to performance. Even a grassroots club, even a purely amateur grassroots club, having the committee, everyone on the same page with the players and the playing group and the coaching staff, and everyone thinking the same thing, that's when good things happen.
Yeah. Cool. And what about when bad things happen? Because that definitely happens. And, if you look at, team culture development in a linear fashion, you often hear the word forming, norming, storming, performing, that there's in a linear fashion, it goes in that way. But sometimes that storming stage can be a little bit rocky. You've explored shared experiences, getting to know each other's story, empathy. What about when you come across those players? Sometimes it's just a few who just resist this process. What have been some successful ways to address that in your experience?
Yeah. So I think I'll give you an example of where I think I've got it wrong. Because I sometimes think that the lessons you can draw from getting it wrong create that ability to change. Whereas if you get it right, you just carry on doing the same thing. So
that's why I've changed a lot as a coach.
I think that wrong. yeah, but that's all part of growth, and that's part of growing and developing as a critically developing as a person, not just as a coach. So where did I get it wrong? During one of my tours of Afghanistan, there was a situation where one of the guys, over a couple of days, I noticed some slight behavioural changes, negative behavioural changes. The guy was a great operator, likable, great part of the team. But I noticed these slight behaviour changes, and what I didn't do was address it there and then. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't sort of show that vulnerability and say, "Hey, look, mate, what's going on?" I didn't show that empathy that would have allowed this situation to be resolved. So the upshot was we were on a patrol and there was a situation, and he just started crying, and I thought, oh God, he's injured. And I went over, looking for blood or a serious sort of like bone break or something, because this guy was sat there crying, and I couldn't see anything. I thought, well, this is weird. I can't see any injury. And I said, what's wrong? And he just said, oh, she's left me. She wrote me a letter. That's it. It's over. I thought, oh, right. And it all fell into place. I thought, oh, God. This guy was dumped by his girlfriend by letter when we were in theatre. And it affected him that much that, there was stuff going on around him, and he just sat there and he was just crying. The pressure and maybe the fear, anxiety, whatever of that situation meant that he was just in tears. And I'd almost allowed that to happen, inadvertently allowed that to happen. And I thought, I got to speak about this.
And it happened at the most crucial time as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And so I said to him, look, when this finishes, when this is all over and we're back at the base, you and I will sit down and we'll have a brew, and you can tell me everything that's happened. And he went, all right, okay, yeah. And then was kind of back to normal. And it all finished. We all wrapped it up, and luckily nothing bad happened. And we got back to the base. And once we'd done all the sort of post situation admin and all that, and I went and grabbed him and said, hey mate, come on, let's go and get a brew. So we found a quiet corner of the camp, and we sat there, and I said, right, what's happened? And so this was a little shared experience amongst the two of us, and he told me what happened. I said, right, go and grab the letter. So he got the letter, he read it to me. I didn't really say very much. I just let him kind of talk about it and discuss and talk about how he was feeling, how it affected him. And I think because one aspect of empathy, I think, is just being a good listener.
Yeah.
I didn't try to offer him any advice or any kind of like little nuggets. I just listened to what he was saying. And we were sat there for about, I reckon it's probably nearly an hour at least, with him sort of talking about things. And then, I mean, it certainly wasn't resolved after that hour. He was still very upset. But what it did is it allowed him to voice what was upsetting him, and therefore we could then sort of start that process of getting over it. Funnily enough, a couple of days later, he came up to me again and said, thank you. And I said, no, you don't even thank me. I should have done this days ago. But what that meant, so what I learned from that was actually, if you're a leader, it's not necessarily about confronting issues. It's about opening up a doorway for people to be able to talk. And so there will be players who, for whatever reason, a coach thinks doesn't fit or doesn't get on with, or whatever the situation might be, or maybe they're expressing behaviours that are detrimental to the team or have a negative impact on the team. And it's not necessarily about confronting those. Sitting down with that person and saying, hey, what's going on? Talk to me. More often than not, I suspect that the outcome of that will be a dialogue that means both people understand each other a bit more, and therefore you can then work together, because it's about the understanding. And if you understand someone, you can then, so as a relationship, if you understand the other person, that allows you to then both develop and both maybe change or make those steps that actually change those negative behaviors into positive team influence. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Great story too. And there's so many parallels that you could add into a team environment. So some awesome advice there. Part of your process that you're doing with all these little groups that you've got on the go is one really cool one called the Rugby Outreach Project. It's a charitable organization that's assisting groups who may not have the funds to do things like employ a strength and conditioning coach or create a strength and conditioning program, those kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so UK-based charity, registered in the UK, I should say, but but I operate anywhere in the world. So I give teams free S&C and rugby fitness advice. Any team anywhere around the world. I've worked with teams who were trying to get on the World Sevens series, all the way down to local grassroots teams in Africa or the Pacific or wherever.
Awesome.
It was kind of born out of. So I did a 2-season internship, part-time internship at Bath in the academy in the performance department, and that wrapped up, and I thought, I want to sort of kick on with this, and I had an idea of offering sort of online stuff, but for a fee, a lot like a lot of people seem to do at the moment. I had a team from Papua New Guinea a coach of a team from Papua New Guinea get in touch, and I said, yeah, here's my fees, here's what you get for that. I didn't really get a response for a day or two, and I thought, he probably hasn't got any money. It's a small village team in the Eastern Highlands, and I used to live in PNG as a kid, so I thought, right, you know what, I'll do this for free, and I did. And a couple of days later, another coach, completely coincidentally from the other side of PNG, got in touch and said, I'm looking for something. And I said, okay, I'll do it for free. Once I did those two, I thought, I think there's something in this. And I spent about probably 2 years doing that, just myself as a, just as if it's essentially being referred, or people referring teams to me. And then I turned it into a charity about, it was during the first lockdown, so 2020, so about 18 months ago, turned it into a charity. And that's what it is. So teams get in touch, and I give them free fitness or strength advice based on what they want to achieve, coupled with maybe equipment they've got, or what sort of infrastructure they have. There's a lot you can do in rugby without a gym, just with an area of grass or an area of ground. And so I sort of give the players, or give the coaches advice, and the coaches deliver that to the players. I don't sort of step in and coach, but I certainly empower the existing coaching structure to then deliver that to their players.
Oh, that's awesome. That must be really rewarding as well at the same time. Cool. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up, who was one of those players that really stood out to you that you got you into rugby?
So I, probably not as a kid, but certainly as a kind of teenager and older, I used to watch every clip of Serevi playing.
Oh yeah.
Sevens. Seeing him play made me realise that
you can't,
as a player. yeah. Although actually that's the only the good bit of my game. So it made me realise that you could express yourself as an individual on the pitch. That it wasn't just about going through a series of moves, predetermined by someone. Actually, you could express yourself, and you could be yourself on the pitch. And when sort of YouTube got popular and there was clips of him playing sevens, I would watch those on a weekly basis and just think, this guy is incredible. And then I'd go and try and do it on the pitch on the Saturday, which occasionally came off, occasionally didn't.
There we
go. But it meant that I was trying things. That was amazing.
100%. Yeah. Awesome. And what about now? Who are some of the players you like watching go around?
So I think with that kind of same vein, and I always I've always been drawn to players who are able to express themselves on the pitch as individuals. And that's everyone from people. I've always been a big fan of watching Sergio Parise play. I thought he was fantastic, incredibly skillful. More recently, though, or people like I've always been drawn to very highly skilled players, regardless of the position. But more recently, probably someone like Marcus Smith. Quite enjoy watching Marcus Smith play. I do like watching sevens because I think that it's exciting. It can go from end to end pretty quickly, but it also that format allows players to express themselves in a way that you might not be able to do in 15s. But yeah, certainly those kind of highly skilled players who express themselves on the pitch, Marcus Smith, Finn Russell, those kind of players are always ones that I've been more drawn to.
Yeah, I suppose you would have liked the clip going around of Quade Cooper doing his NFL pass from one side of the field to the winger on the other side of the field.
Quade Cooper is another one who I would watch when he was playing for the Wallabies, and occasionally just think, how does he do that? At what point did he think that was possible? And then he goes and does it, and it's and it's amazing. I remember watching. I went to watch New Zealand France at the World Cup at the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, and the All Blacks put on an absolute show. And I think Milner Scudder scored 2 or 3. 2 of them were on the same side I was sat, and I was slightly high up, so I could almost get a sort of looking down view of and he would do something, and I remember watching it just thinking, how did he know that was going to come off? I thought he couldn't have known. He just decided to have a go, because that was him expressing himself on the pitch. And it was also when I think who was the other winger? Julian Surveyor bumped off about 4 French players over the line. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's impressive. But, so it was all those players who express themselves on the pitch. I've always been drawn to those kinds of players.
Cool. And what about coaches? Third question: who are some coaches that you like what they're doing?
So currently, I think Andy Friend and Stuart Lancaster. Andy Friend at Connacht, Stuart Lancaster at Leicester are doing really well. I really like how Exeter have had this sort of long-term continued success. I think that speaks volumes for the culture at the club, what they're doing, how they are, and how they're developing their players and the staff. You can't have that kind of long-term continued success without good culture and leadership. And I really like the way that Harlequins turned it around last season without a head coach, and now they've got a head coach in Tabai Matson, who I think was a great hire and has fitted in really well. That's just purely from an external viewpoint. But I really liked how Harlequins went, you know what, we'll just go without a head coach. We'll just do it as a group. And I did. And after that, I did think, I wonder if they're going to hire a head coach or just carry on the way they are. But they did, and I think they made a great choice, and they sort of kind of carried that on, and so that I find that very impressive as well.
All right. Well, final question before we wrap things up then. And what about someone in a grassroots community that you feel is doing really good work that deserves some recognition? Yeah.
So growing up, I used to play for Sidmouth Rugby Club in Devon. And one of the guys who was down there, helping out as I was coming through, and is still involved in the club now, is a guy called Bob Boff. And he was always there at the club, always helping out. One day he might be serving behind the bar, another day he might be putting the lines on the pitch. He was that kind of person. And during one of my Afghan tours, I had a parcel arrive from a mate, and it was a club shirt.
Nice.
And it was that was quite emotional. I sat there on my sort of cot bed with this sort of shirt to my face, just almost feeling really emotional. And what had happened is my mate had gone to Bob and said, "Hey, look, Andy's in Afghanistan at the moment. Can we get him a shirt?" And he went, "Wait there." And he went and got one of the club shirts and went, "No one will miss this. Send him this one." And it was a really emotional moment. And a couple of years later, I happened to be back at the club. We would sometimes put an old boys sevens team in. And when I say old, I mean we're all 35 plus sort of old. And Bob was there, and I went up to him and gave him a big hug. And he was a bit surprised. I think he felt a bit awkward about this. And then when I explained that, he got a bit bashful and a bit sheepish. But I don't think he was used to that kind of someone really coming up and saying and emotionally saying thank you. But it's guys like that, and you get it, guys and girls and men and women like that who are at every sports club, who help out, who give their own time, who are selfless in what they do. And without those people, clubs wouldn't function. Outside of this kind of top tier, there's very little money in rugby, and sport in general. So actually, it's those kind of people who really make clubs tick and get and turn kids turning up on a Sunday morning and then they pop out the other side, and then they keep playing as adults. And without that, without that, rugby will just die.
100%. All right, Andrew. Well, it's been awesome having a chat with you, and I'll make sure to put all your relevant details in the show notes so people can go and check out all the projects that you've got running. I love talking about leadership and team culture, so this one's been a really enjoyable chat, and I've got no doubt coaches will get a lot out of it. So want to thank you for giving up your time, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Awesome. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.